And I'll pull up my slides. There we go. Welcome, everyone. Happy Thursday. It is sunny in Albany, and I'm so happy to be joined by some fantastic colleagues today for Leaders Learning Live. Can you see the screen? Let me make sure this is like full view here, but I'm not used to this sort of slide deck here. Here we go, slideshow. Okay, can you see it full screen now? Okay, good. Well, welcome to Leaders Learning Live. It is May 18th, and I'm so happy to be talking about the topic of fostering positive and inclusive workplaces. This is about the time when people start to get a little more happy, a little spring in your step with the sun shining. And so it feels like an appropriate topic to talk about. It's always an appropriate one, but even more so now when we're coming out of our hiding places from the winter. And so we've got a fantastic group assembled, and I'm going to introduce today's moderator. He serves as a leadership fellow for the SAIL Institute, Dr. Ron Milon. Welcome, Ron. So Ron has been supporting the Institute in a variety of ways as a fellow over the past few years. And very recently, he transitioned from the Fashion Institute of Technology as the Chief Diversity Officer to a role outside of SUNY and outside of higher ed, actually. But we're so excited for him with this great opportunity to serve as Executive Director of Diversity and Culture at the Nederlander Theater Organization. So he'll, I'm sure, share a little bit more about his background. And I think all of you should know me by now. If this is your first Leaders Learning Live, though, I'm the director for the SAIL Institute in Organizational Development at System Administration. I've been here about 6 years and have had the privilege of supporting leaders at all different levels and host a variety of different programs. So if you're new to SAIL, please check out the website and see if there's another program that might support you where you are. So that's me, and that is Ron, and I'm going to pass it over to Ron now so he can introduce today's panel.
All right, Carolyn, thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today. This is a very important series, and it's a series that we have every third Thursday, and it's free. All you have to do is register for it. You can register for it on the website, and they're great topics where we get to talk about things that impact you as educational leaders. And so what I normally do when I introduce people is I do something different. I ask, how are you checking in? You know, because each of us are coming in from something else. How are you checking in? So I'm going to start off by saying I'm checking in. I'm positive. I feel great. I feel great being in this place with everyone here, talking and sharing. And as Carolyn said, I was in higher education. I was in higher education for 34 years. And I just recently changed into doing this work in the theater industry. And this is week 3 for me, and I'm loving it. There's aspects of higher education I miss and love and can never fully remove myself. So I hope I can share some insight with you today as well. So basically, let's start off with Carolyn. How are you checking in today?
Oh, well, thanks, Ron. I am going to be running the Workforce Challenge later today. So if I'm being completely honest, I'm a little preoccupied with how out of shape I might be in this very moment. But I'm looking forward to running it with my colleagues and just getting together to have some fun outdoors with matching t-shirts and running through the streets of Albany. So, and a night that I don't have to cook dinner.
There you go. Good luck. Thank you. Okay, let's go, Robbie. It's good to see you. How are we checking in?
It's good to see you too. It's good to see everybody on the call. I'm checking in with joy and enthusiasm for the conversation and the full group here today present at Geneseo, which is where my home base is as the Chief Diversity Officer there. We are gearing up for commencement season. I'm describing it as commencement fever. And so I'm checking in also with commencement fever surrounding me at my home base here at Geneseo.
Thank you. It's good seeing you. Ritu, welcome. And how are we checking in?
Well, hello, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm excited to be here. I'm also in the middle of grades. Grades are due tonight at 11:59. So as the chair, I'm running around trying to figure out who's going to not get the grades in. And no, let's be positive. Who's going to get their grades in by 11:58. So I'm a little anxious, but I'm definitely excited to be here. So thank you.
Welcome to the SUNY Geneseo family. It's good to meet you. I look forward to the conversation. And there's one person here who was not listed as a panelist, but she is a fellow, and we work together. And I'm so happy to see her, Marcia. How are you checking in?
Wow, I'm checking in, like, excited that Ritu has joined us, and seeing Ron in your new role. It just makes me smile that I'm retired.
Very good. Very good. Welcome. And to everyone else, we're going to have a great time today. And as Carolyn mentioned, this will be recorded. But let's first just go over some of the learning objectives for today's session to basically understand the attributes of a positive and inclusive workplace, to understand how belonging fits into the concept of an inclusive workplace. And then the final objective is be empowered to improve your workplace culture. And these are important topics in terms of fostering a positive and inclusive workplace culture. So what I'm going to do is I have a series of questions to help us keep focus, and that I'll ask to the panelists. And then we have some time, and I hope we have some time. We will open up questions to everyone else to ask myself or the panelists. And again, this will be recorded and available on the website for any time you want to review it. How's that? So my first question is for each panelist is, how might you define an inclusive workplace? And what does it feel like? So I'm going to go with my colleague, Robbie. We're going to start off with that, and then we'll move around. Robbie?
All right, happy to kick us off, and I'm happy to hear others fill in gaps of everything that I forget to mention or omit. It's such a big question. I'm actually going to kick us off by actually complicating the question a little bit, if I could, which is to acknowledge the difference between inclusivity and belonging, because the question is, how might you define an inclusive workplace? And I'm going to offer two ways of defining it. One is the broad definition, the societally embraced definition, and one is the definition that really distinguishes it from belonging. When I think about the broad definition, how generally people think about inclusivity and an inclusive workplace, it really is a feeling of being able to be yourself, to feel valued, respected, like you can show up authentic without risk and fear of repercussion, that your voice has an impact, your voice matters, you feel like you have community, safety, security, belonging. Now that's the broadly held, my version of the broadly held, not the Merriam-Webster definition, but the broadly held definition of inclusive and an inclusive workplace. You can feel it in your body, you can feel it in your shoulders, you can feel it in your heart, you can feel it in the way you maybe transcend spaces and move around, and the way where you place your chin and your eyes, and it shows up in your work and your efficiency and effectiveness in your work. But the difference between inclusivity and belonging, in my mind, and I'm forecasting potentially some conversations that'll show up later, is I don't think actually that's inclusivity at all. I think that inclusivity is part of that. Inclusivity is, and an inclusive workplace is, you are allowed to be here. We see you, we recognize that you're here, but we haven't necessarily done anything to ensure that you have a positive experience here and to ensure that your voice actually has an impact here. Whereas belonging says, we see that you're here, we value that you're here, we want you to be here, and we are doing the work of transforming structures and systems and groups and social interactions, etc., so that you feel like you can breathe deeply, put your shoulders down, your chin up, move around spaces without fear of repercussion, and feel a sense of support and respect from colleagues, even and sometimes because of dissent and disagreement. And so but belonging for me is the bigger conversation, is the conversation about how can I be optimally effective? How can I show up in my fullness? Whereas inclusivity is the starting line to say, I am allowed to be here. This is a space where I am included, regardless of my experience in that space. That's my lead off, Ron.
I love it. It's perfect, actually. It's perfect. And there was actually something in the chronic, not in the chronic, but it was on LinkedIn talking about belonging and how it's damaging DEI. And part of the reason why I say it's damaging is because people don't understand it. And by what you just gave an understanding of it, and the people can really understand how to implement it, how to roll it out, and what it means. So thank you. So Ritu, I want to get your perspective on that, and in terms of, you work in a classroom, creating an inclusive, what does that inclusive classroom workplace look like?
Yeah, and thank you, Robbie, because I actually jotted down similar, that I wanted to break apart the definitions. And for me, I also work on the DEI advisory board to the CDIO here. And so I'm on a team that also interviews potential hires. And what I really liked with what Robbie said is that for me, inclusivity translates almost to a voice. So they ask you about your voice, they ask you about your thoughts, maybe on this new law or this new policy. But belonging means that you have the agency to make a change and that you can navigate that. And I don't think we all have that yet. I think schools have done a good job about fostering inclusivity in terms of bringing in more voices, bringing in more authentic positions to the table. But there's not yet that agency to make that systemic change. And so that's why we're still seeing some of this lack of belonging and lack of feeling agentic in what we're doing day to day. We're not seeing those on a wider scale. We're not yet seeing policies being changed, and some of the things just, they hear us, but things are reproduced over and over again. So I love that you made that distinction.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you. I want to go to Carolyn right now. Carolyn, we've been talking about this a lot, and we actually did a training session last summer regarding inclusive leadership. And what are some of the attributes you feel are needed in creating an inclusive workplace?
Well, I love this topic in general. I just have to open up by saying that I started out my career working for the Khalil Jameson Consulting Group, which is a pretty well-known diversity and inclusion consulting group. And it's based right here in the Capital Region, but I had the opportunity to travel and work with some really amazing clients. And so for the better part of my career here, I've been talking about inclusion and belonging and diversity, and working with leaders to help them understand what their employees are saying, to care what they're saying, how to listen better, leading workshops to be able to empower people at all levels to do this. And really, I think the crux of the work is getting the leaders to hear it and live it out. So operationalizing it. And, I think we're all in higher ed because we want to make a positive impact. So we have it a little bit easier than maybe some other industries. But having that set of values and then understanding as a leader what you can do is really, really important. And so that's why I'm just grateful to be here today and talking about it. So when you ask, what are the attributes, what are the characteristics in organizations that live this out? I think Robbie did a great job of saying it when she described, how people carry themselves. And we see it, come out in culture surveys when people care enough to ask. And when they don't do it, you can definitely see it come out in those results too. And unfortunately, SAIL will get calls, when it's not happening. And so then we've got to come in and sort of intervene. So I try as best I can in this role to be proactive and help leaders start the conversation, understand that having these values from the get-go is really important. And then what do you do to translate how you care into what the impact is going to be, how it plays out with regular employees doing their job every day. So lots of different ways, but I think this panel is a great start to elicit some of the things you might be able to do and be observing.
Thank you, Carolyn. And I have to say that normally Carolyn is like in the background and producing, make sure everything goes well. And I think that I appreciate your knowledge and your experience, and I'm glad you're bringing it out today. So thank you. Marcia, I got a question for you. I want to start with you. I can't keep you out. I want to include you as well. And basically, in your experience, what are some of the challenges you faced in the past in creating an inclusive workplace? And what advice you have for overcoming those?
Wow, I wasn't going to talk today, but now that you've put me on the spot, I am going to talk. I can't say no. Let me say this. You asked a really good question, and part of the answer is working with allies. You can, beat yourself up trying to get everyone on the same page, but you're going to be more successful if you bring in the 2 or 3 people who are on the same page, and they can help move the work forward. When we talk about this topic about inclusivity, and, I'm using the word agency around the belonging piece that came out. As a person of color, sometimes you forget how much agency you actually have in moving diversity, equity, and inclusion forward. The fact is, we've all worked hard to be where we are, and getting allies, people like Carolyn, like Ritu, like Robbie, all on the same page. If you've got those allies, the work actually becomes easier than trying to do it alone. I don't even remember what the question was.
No, it was basically what challenges you think one would face in creating.
Don't worry about the naysayers. Work on the couple of people that are going to be working with you to move yourself forward. So the challenge is that there are always going to be people who don't understand the work. Helps us all. And the challenge is that you've got to stay focused on the people that are moving us forward.
Awesome. Thank you. I like that response. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Anyone else wants to add to that? Basically, what are some of the challenges in our panel, some of the challenges you may have faced in creating inclusive work, in workplace? Robbie, you want to add something to that? Or
I saw Ritu's hand first, and then I'll follow gladly.
Okay, go ahead.
All right,
Yeah.
thanks. Oh, I just wanted to piggyback on what Marcia said, because as a person of color and a woman, there's also a lot of the imposter syndrome, wondering how you got here. And it's not necessarily coming from you, but what you're hearing too. And so, reminding yourself to find the allies. You're not going to please everyone, but let's find the people that are willing to support you and that are willing to work with you, give you feedback, constructive feedback. It doesn't always have to be positive, but in a way that is solution oriented and not problem heavy. Because there'll be lots of times where things are problem heavy as you're listening to voices, but to refocus it to solution oriented. And I think that's something that, you're navigating every day in these positions. And particularly when you're in historically underrepresented groups, it's hard to feel like you had a voice at the table in the first place, and then you're trying to get through those next sort of steps and hurdles in a way.
I like that. Thank you. Robbie?
I love everything that my colleagues have shared, and I'm going to add in thinking on a macro level. So based on my Chief Diversity Officer hat, I'm often thinking on a macro level about the ways that organizations function and groups. And some of the challenges that I would illustrate, are that as a higher education community, we are susceptible to everything happening outside of our community, both because our walls aren't, they're not there, right? There's transients between, the community around our campus, but also through social media, internet, et cetera. There's not a boundary. And also our community changes all the time, sort of by design, actually. And so when we think about what exists within our community, it's important to acknowledge its susceptibility to everything outside. And so because of that, it's really about understanding the role of bias and stereotypes and microaggressions and what I would call dominant narratives, which is a term maybe some of you know and others it would be new for and worth Googling. Dominant narratives, stereotypes, microaggressions, all of these things are the ways that bias, and often implicit bias, shows up in our interactions, in our intrapersonal lives, so the ways that we just understand ourselves and the world, and in the ways that we design policies and structures and groups and make decisions and everything Ritu was just talking about, having influence over things that are happening, on a college level. And so the challenges are that we are perpetually imperfect, and that we often, as a community and as people within it, will have a difference between intention and impact. And regardless of our aspirations to promote things like inclusion and belonging and more, and social justice and other ideals, we will simultaneously be perpetuating bias. And so there's this constant work that needs to go into it if we're really thinking about, promoting an inclusive workplace. It's not something we can do and then check off a list. It's something that's constant work, and it's introspective work. My advice, or some of the things that I think are solutionary, some of it, to be honest with you, is actually going back to some of the most simplest building blocks. A lot of times when we see big challenges, and this is among the biggest challenges that are out there, we try to think about big, complicated solutions. And on its really foundational level, this is about listening. It's about empathy. It's about humility. It's about voice. It's about taking actions aligned with our values. It's about noticing things. It's about noticing power, which can be very complicated and can be simple if we choose to notice these things and then choose to listen, be empathetic, have our voice, and take action associated with it. And we see these as cyclic, ongoing challenges that we will always be imperfect at. But I think at the heart of it is really recognizing the susceptibility of our communities to everything that exists, within and outside of us.
Ron, are you going to ask me to follow that? Come on.
Okay. The thing is, Carolyn, the thing is, Robbie, discussion is leading me to my next topic in this discussion. And it's wonderful because there's a synergy in these topics, and it's so important to understand that. But I wanted to say, before I go into that question, one thing my concern is, as a Chief Diversity Officer, is that we talked so much early on, during the Black Lives Matter movement, during the pandemic, that there's a movement to change. And now, when things seem to be settling down, is it just, is this just a moment? And now I'm just worried about, my concern is it just an afterthought. And my thing is, when you talk about creating an inclusive workplace, you're putting things and attributes in place so that it continues to make the whole process sustainable. But you can do that, but if the behaviors are not there, it means nothing. So
can I just add a little bit before we transition to the next question?
Absolutely.
So, that's like really, really challenging to follow up on what Robbie shared. Amazing. I guess I just wanted to add, because I think about leadership and supporting leaders every day. The question is about challenges that we face in trying to create inclusive environments. And so I see a few challenges. It's a leader's approach to leadership. Robbie hinted at the power and noticing power and how you handle power. I think a lot of, especially newer leaders, just have they walk into the role not really thinking about that power that they have and how to use it. And it's not until there's a problem that, they try to figure out, oh, what has gone wrong and how do I fix this now? But thinking about your power and trying to be intentional about empowering your team and listening goes a really long way. And so, it's at the core of all of our programs is, thinking and reflecting on your own approach to leadership. So we spend a lot of time there. And so I would say that, just the awareness and setting your own intention about your power as a leader. And then leaders get tripped up when they are challenged to talk about sensitive topics. Crucial conversations is a really big curriculum that we offer, and it is so helpful in so many ways. Leaders that can't get into the messy stuff or the stuff that feels uncomfortable, or they really wait too long and they cause more damage by waiting, that's a big challenge. So getting leaders comfortable with the uncomfortable and to just keep learning and, figuring out how to pick yourself up when you do feel like you fell off or you didn't do it as perfectly as you wanted to. All of those things are where I see the challenges, but, it's simple behaviors that get you back on track, listening and caring.
Yeah. And that's a part of empathy as well, being empathetic. And a lot of times people just ignore that, the importance of that, and it's so important. But let's take us to the next. Robbie actually started off in the beginning talking about the whole concept, the difference between belonging and inclusivity. And I want to go more into the belonging piece because that's the piece that's, I think, in many ways, the glue that keeps everything together and makes what we do meaningful. And so what I want to do is provide some practical solutions for our friends on here today. So my thing is, and when we talk about belonging, is there a way that we could check in or monitor if there are employees or even students that don't have a sense of belonging? Okay. Is there a way that we could check in or monitor, how employees, especially after the pandemic, a lot of people, we dealt with a lot of trauma and disconnects. Is there a way we can check that and what can we do about it? So, Ritu, you want to start?
Mind if I jump in?
Please.
It's really important when we think about language because language is so cultural. So whereas you can ask students or ask your employees and faculty how they're feeling, culturally, sometimes it's not acceptable to share that. Sometimes it's better to hide it. And using the right language with the right groups, and if that means kind of sectioning things off, if it means smaller check-ins or one-on-one check-ins. But I know specifically in a lot of communities of color, it's not encouraged to check in, and it's actually actively discouraged because you're just trying to make it. So it's a sign of weakness in some sense to check in and say that you're struggling. And when you're suffering from imposter syndrome, when you say something like, my door is open, please ask questions, you're not going to ask questions. It has to be almost direct. Can you tell me what you're thinking about this? Can you tell me what you're thinking about this? I'm thinking of doing this. Can you give me your feedback? So making those direct questions becomes a little more powerful for people to kind of jump in. So being really deliberate in how you're doing that, because there's a tendency for us to say, I'm here, my door's open, let me know if you have any questions. I feel like I do that in every email, let me know if you have any questions. And I've tried to really stop that and say, let me know how you're thinking about this, this, and this, and let me know if you see any issues with this, this, and this, just to give that permission to be specific about what's happening and where you're feeling things might need adjustment.
Thank you. Marcy, I'm curious what you have to say.
So I'm laughing because these settings are completely uncomfortable, but I keep putting myself in them. And So Ron, thank you for pushing me in this direction. 35 years of teaching and working in a department, there are areas, especially around diversity, equity, inclusion, that I have ideas, but Ritu's point about asking for specific feedback is a really good one. If you've ever taught in a college classroom, if you ask, are there any questions? There are never any questions. But if you reach out to Keith Kaplan and say, Keith, what are your questions? He will have questions and specific things he wants to say. Sometimes you need to directly speak to people in a way that helps them see that they do exist and they do belong. So you asked me a question, and the fact is, the way we used to do things 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago cannot be the same way that we can encourage leaders. There are as many different followers as there are leaders. And so this is about Leaders Learning Live. And we have to help people feel comfortable about the little work that they can do in the area of, as you said, inclusivity, diversity, equity. We've got to give permission to people to do it the way that they're comfortable, because they'll be more successful in that way. So I've rambled on, and I'm going to pass it back to you, Ron.
Thank you. I'm glad I was able to push you, and I'm glad to help you, because pushing, when I push, it's out of love, it's out of help. So thank you. Right. Robbie, I wanted what you have to say.
Yeah. I love everything, that others have shared. And so I think I'll focus on just a couple parts of the question. Yes, are there ways to check in or monitor, how people are feeling? Of course. And there's formal ways and there's informal ways. There's formal ways we could brainstorm things like surveys and group dialogues and check-in sessions, and the role of a supervisor and the role of affinity groups, and think about formal structures. But I want to think a little bit about informal. I think even more important than figuring out moments to check in and monitor is actually to build a culture of care, so that you can't go through the day or the week without people checking in on people. And so you don't need to then find ways to check in or monitor, because the ethos is such that people are checking in and monitoring each other in ways that are culturally appropriate and will provide opportunities for people to raise things as they choose, in ways that feel comfortable for them. Those are a couple of my thoughts. I wanted to say a couple other related comments, though, in this point. There's an element of this that's also about trust, and also about what do you do with your increased understanding of how people are feeling. The trust piece is, who is doing the asking, the how are you question, and is that somebody who you feel, because they are asking, you feel like pressured to answer? Versus you have choice, and go back to the word agency and choosing not to answer. This idea that when I answer you, what is going to happen as a result? Are you asking me because I trust that you are somebody who is asking because you care about me as a person? Or do I distrust and think you're asking me because you're going to use this information in a certain way that I'm uncomfortable with, and there's an element of trust, and there's an identity layer to that too. Does the person who's asking me either share some salient identities as me, or act in a way that I understand that they deeply empathize with, the identities that I hold? There's a whole element of trust. And then there's this question of what do you do with the information? And that's the macro, right? And so on an individual level, it's about creating a culture of care. But on a macro level, if we learn that lots of people are feeling a certain way, a lack of belonging, a low morale, which is unfortunately really pervasive these days within higher education and beyond, then we need to ask hard questions like, does this reflect everybody? who is reflected within that, who is not. We need to ask questions about, about why and the role of identity and intersectionality within that why, the role of power within the why. And we need to be careful not to assume that one person's experience is generalizable to a whole group, and to really remember that every person who answered the question of, how are you? Is speaking just for themselves. So there's ways to check in on people, and there's ways to think about how do we build a culture where we don't need to think about when we're checking in on people because we're always checking in on people. And then there's this whole layer of ethics associated with it, and data analysis almost sort of associated with a justice lens.
Robbie, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just have to say, I love the insights, Robbie. I mean, you're helping me to learn, right? Because I'm a person who approaches things with sort of an HR approach, and I naturally want to ask the questions, but then I haven't really given a lot of thought to how the power dynamic, or like what do I do with the information now? Or are they feeling like they can actually trust me to share it? So you're getting me to think about this in a deeper way, which I really appreciate. I think, I get approached by leaders who are doing this, and they try to think more macro about, how do I know if my employees are engaged, right? We don't want quiet quitters, or, people feeling like they're just sort of in silos. We want the departments to be collaborative and all of that. So I put in the chat there probably the most popular 12 questions that employees are asked through culture surveys. So that's Gallup's employee engagement survey. And so we've known for a very long time that having employees engaged in their work is what we're striving for. And so making sure that they feel that connection and that they feel seen, and all of those best practices with organizational behavior. But yeah, I think it's really, I'm just grateful that you're getting me to think a little bit more about the trust piece. And I would say it got me thinking about the importance of a mentor for people. And so maybe even more powerful than me as someone's supervisor, asking them, how are you doing? Or is this going? Like, you've got this big thing in your personal life coming up, like, how are you handling that? But having them work with a mentor, that they got some established trust. And it's not like, now what do I do with the information that they might be worried about? So we talk about mentors and the importance of mentors all the time, but it got me thinking again about encouraging staff to seek out a mentor is really something that we should all be working towards.
Carolyn, thank you very much. We were talking, the question was how to check in with people, and this is I think it's more complicated now when you have hybrid, you have remote. For any advice on how managers could really deal with this new changing dynamic, could really reach out to employees who are feeling isolated or excluded. How do you do that when you have a hybrid situation, when you have a remote situation?
I love technology. Do you mind if I kick it off?
I definitely want you to jump in.
I love the enhanced freedom that employees have. And SUNY here at System, we're working a 50%, in the office, 50% remote. And so schedules are all over the place at the current moment. And I am very comfortable with that. I feel like nothing has really changed when it comes to managing. Yes, we might be in different physical locations, but the work is still there, and the communication times that we've prioritized and set aside are still there. And so every Monday morning, I love to have a 10 a.m. team check-in and look at the priorities and what's important this week, and where is everyone in the world, and just being aligned in that. And then at the same time, keeping, because it's easy to push these things off, those one-on-ones with employees, but I love to have those every 2 weeks. And that gives us an opportunity to just say, how are things going for you? What is in your way? What can I do better? And so keeping that a priority, to not shift in the ever busy landscape that we're in. But those two things I think are important. And once in a while, thinking about what the things are that you can celebrate together as a team, I think are really important. So, you know, who's on the team? How do they enjoy their sort of free time? You know, is it ice cream because it's you know, nicer weather and everybody wants to get together in person to celebrate, or is it a Kahoot online because the students are really into that? But thinking about the group and the makeup and what makes them happy.
You know, Carolyn always throws good stuff out there. Thank you. Marcia?
I'm going to defer to Ritu for a moment because I know she has to leave at 12:45.
Oh, okay.
And then if there's time, I'll jump back in there.
Rachel, I will also, with the focus in the classroom, that's so important, so critical, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there is a sense of loss with that, as we have faculty who have kind of migrated away and do all online. There's a little there's some that's lost in translation through emails, that authentic engagement and that softening, right? When you don't agree with something that got handed down that you have to do, it's very easy to respond in anger in email, and that worries me a lot. And then for our students, you know, it's getting better, but I worry when they don't see us around. So when they don't see faculty here, you know, it's much easier to kind of walk by and say, oh, I wanted to ask you a question about this assignment. But if faculty are remote, that becomes more of an issue. So it's something I'm constantly balancing. I have reached out and touched people on the shoulder and said, hey, we're doing this on Friday. Can you please come down? It would be great to have you. You only have to stay for this long, but it would be great to see your face and just interact with you. And that's helped. But I know people are comfortable and not necessarily coming. And there's definitely a comfort and a sense of security in your own space. But to kind of encourage people to come together again is difficult, because there are people with underlying conditions and disabilities that you want to be sensitive to, but balance the need to build that sense of belonging with everyone, and make sure new faculty are meeting faculty that have been here for 20 years and have kind of taken off and done things online. So it's a struggle for me. I'm trying to figure out how to balance that too.
Ritu, I have to say, I know you have to get ready to go, but it's such a pleasure to have you here, share with us, and we hope that you will come and visit us again. You're always welcome to the SUNY Geneseo family, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
Right, thank you. And now I want to give some time for our audience to ask us questions, but I do have one more question for Carolyn and Robbie and Marcia if she wants to join in. We talked about the whole attributes. What are the attributes? We talked about the whole concept of belonging as a concept of inclusive workplace. But my final question is focusing on how to improve and how to sustain this inclusive environment. So once created, how do we sustain a inclusive workplace? So once we get it, how do we sustain it? Anyone can jump in.
Well, I'm going to jump in a little bit and bring us out a little bit, thinking about my adult daughter who works not in higher ed, who is experimenting with wanting to be remote and not in an office. And I'm learning that our world is going to be very different in 5 or 10 years, where some of our youngest members are thinking that remote work is what they want to do 100%. And we can't deny that. But I'm also thinking about where we are currently in higher ed, where faculty are often feeling that their workload is too much. And we're asking them to teach their classes, create lessons that are both remote and face-to-face, but we're also trying to make our students who come from all over New York State feel comfortable in a setting on a campus like Oswego or Geneseo. And so they have to see faces. They need to understand that faculty and administrators and leaders want them in that space. But if they have a thought about being remote, maybe they want to be in New York City and be a student at Oswego. We are struggling right now trying to figure out what that happy medium is. And we all have to sort of stay in the mix, stay in the discussion, because the next generation is going to try to figure out what it means to be a residential campus and what it means to be an inclusive campus, and how we are going to have to build that for them so that they can stay with SUNY. So I wanted to say that out loud, but I really wanted to hear what Robbie and Carolyn have to say about that. Because again, students are different today than they were even 3 years ago.
Thank you. Robbie and Carolyn, want to jump in?
I'll let the amazing Robbie go first.
Oh my gosh. That's very generous. I don't know that I love your, it's not even a question, but like the offering sort of with a ellipses at the end of it, Marcia. And I think the answers aren't known yet, because I think the changes, the rapidness of these changes haven't slowed yet. And so I don't know that we know what even is going to exist 2 years, 1 year from now, even less further out. So I am a product of a liberal arts education. And Geneseo is a liberal arts, education institution. And so at the heartbeat of a liberal arts education is this idea that we can solve problems that don't yet exist by developing the skills and the strategies that we can apply to any setting. So we don't know what that balance is going to be: remote, in person, hybrid, what students of 5 years from now are going to need, what colleagues, what we ourselves are going to need. We don't know any of those things. But what are the underlying skills and strategies and ways of thinking that we can apply to those contexts that are still unknown? And I have to say, I go back to what I was saying earlier about what it means to create inclusive workplaces, really, that are centered in belonging. And that is that it's never done. And that the same things that we need to do to create these environments are also what we need to do to sustain them. And so as people express needs that may not be on our radar today or a year ago, we need to listen. We need to be curious and empathetic and humble. We need to be strategic and listen to their voice and use our own voices, and we need to take action. And we don't know what those outcomes are, but we know something about the process. And I think about my own department here. I've really, as an Office of Diversity and Equity, we try to lean in as much as we can to inclusivity and belonging. And I think we do a pretty darn good job. People really express a lot of gratitude for the ways that they feel in this department. And yet I can tell you probably every day of the week, one or more of us do something that is a display of bias and maybe microaggressive and not inclusive. And that's not because we don't care. It's not because we don't try, that we don't have these explicit values that are trying to encourage and inspire and educate people on how to take action in alignment with our values. It's because these issues are bigger than anybody. And so the same things that are involved in creating inclusive workplaces are also involved in sustaining them. It's about raising self-awareness. It's about those interpersonal skills. And it's about a real thirst for continuing to transform our structures and policies, et cetera, to make sense for all of our constituents, with a special, focus on making sure that those who have been historically marginalized by these systems and structures and policies find that these new systems, structures, policies, work for them. So that's my thoughts.
We thank you.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I'm sort of putting this in two categories as I think about sustaining inclusivity, but it's also sustaining ourselves and our organizations. So I'm thinking, how do we help individuals sustain themselves for a career? And how do we sustain our organizations, our campus, our culture here? And so thinking about on the individual level, the programs that we offer through SAIL are always challenging leaders to be aware of their own mindfulness behaviors, self-care, whatever word you want to give that, but realizing that you need to put your own oxygen mask on first, and it's okay. And it's okay to not be okay sometimes. Like all of those things that we're trying to normalize leaders to be comfortable to share and show vulnerability, because then it allows others to also be human. And so just increasing our own empathy and, speaking about those things comfortably in the workplace. And then our organizations, I think it's important for us to think about, when we want to sustain an inclusive workplace over a period of time as an organization, we have to think that we're a vibrant place with people that are joining and they're in the process of applying for a job now, and they're going to be starting, and we're always going to be onboarding and welcoming new people. So being aware that we've got to, welcome them from the very beginning, and the interview process and onboarding and first 100 days and first year and all of that period of time is important. And to think about, and it's not just one person or one department even that's responsible for it. It's the organization, and it's all the people that make up our organization. And as people are at all different stages of their careers, so we have new supervisors and people who want to be prepared for those roles before they step into it and make mistakes and feel uncomfortable. So preparing people for that and for the next steps in management and leadership. And so offering people opportunities to continue their learning and development, and celebrating when they take those steps and continue to put themselves out there and grow and stretch. And even the leaders who are at the top, our deans and our presidents, recognizing that we're all still learning and it's okay. So joining, just listening in while you're eating lunch, so being a part of it is totally what we want to do if we want to sustain this inclusive workplace. So encouraging and sharing programs where people can learn in easy, comfortable settings, I see as ways that we can sustain it.
All right. Wow. Carolyn, thank you. Robbie, thank you. Marcia, thank you. I would like to open it now for any questions. We have about 7 minutes. Anyone wants to ask a question, panelists, please do. Don't be shy. This is a very safe place. Won't bite you. Just know that this information is available for you. It's recorded. It's on the website. So anytime you want to take a look at it, you can.
Sure, I've got a couple more slides if there are no questions right away. Ron, I can show our slide deck here. Let's see. Okay, so the contact information for everyone who's been a part of today's program, we've got in a slide deck, and I can email this out to the group, but I want you to know that you can reach us, and we're happy to continue the dialogue. The main inbox for SAIL is easy to remember, leadership@suny.edu. And so feel free to send any questions, comments that way. And we've got a survey. I'm going to put this link in the chat so that you can let us know how we did today and give us your feedback. We've got a full calendar year of programs ahead. So I won't read off the slide here, but it's on our website. And we've got a great summer, fall, and even early winter of programs. And our fellows this year are leading these. So you saw Ron, our fellow, moderating today's session. This is a topic that he's an expert and passionate about. And so we've sort of matched our fellows up with their experience and what they've seen in their career with these topics. So we're right now forming panels. If there's a topic that you're interested in and you want to join in and be one of the panelists, reach out. I'd be happy to add your name and include you in the conversation. So we've got today's program, which will soon be added to our growing library of on-demand programs. So the link to our YouTube channel is right there on the sale page as well. So any questions about Leaders Learning Live and what's ahead? No? And if you don't get our sale emails and you want to, right from the homepage, so sunysale.org, if you scroll to the bottom, there's an easy to find button where you can add yourself to our email list. So you can be the first to know when new programs open, when we're accepting nominations or opening registration. And we love to add more people to that list because then we know we're spreading the word all across the system. So that's all I have on my slide deck here. And I just want to make sure I give a special thank you to our moderator today. So Ron, thank you, thank you, thank you. He is so busy with a new move and a new house, and yet he still carves out time for sale, and we appreciate him. So thank you so much to Ron. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Marcia. You sort of got roped in here today and you played along, and we love you too. And thank you for introducing us to Ritu. She was fantastic. So thank you, audience, for being with us. And I hope that you got what you were looking for today, and we see you at a future program.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
I said I was going to put the link in there and I didn't do it. Let me do that now, but I'll email it too.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, folks. Thank you so
And
much.
stop the recording, Carolyn.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stop.